tonight to talk about lobbying and Reggie. And hopefully it will be useful and informative. Oh, well, that's interesting. Let me try to find the presentation again. All right, can folks see the presentation as it's loading? It's doing something? Okay, good to go. All right, excellent. Seems maybe my internet is a little a little slow today. Hopefully it will not fail. So I will just dive right into it. So why do we lobby? We do it for a lot of reasons. One is to educate legislators. Now, you may think that because someone is an elected official, they know a lot about a lot of things, and that's not necessarily the case. Actually, the opposite tends to be true, and they get bombarded with a lot of different issues and legislation that they know actually very little about. So educating them is hugely important. We also work to build relationships with legislators. This is important because a good relationship means that a legislator might be willing to share important information with us regarding policy priorities, strategy. They may be willing to give us a heads up if there's a bad deal happening that can help us with our strategy. And we can also work with them to introduce legislation we care about. We also try to offer alternatives. Often when you're talking with legislators, they'll ask, what would you do differently? How would you fix this? And so we work with them to introduce something that's, different. And it's sort of helpful to have that because they don't want folks to just be saying no all the time, right? They want you to offer up alternatives, and this is a good way to sort of build that relationship and build trust so they can sort of support where we're coming from. And of course, we want to influence legislators so they vote for our priorities. We care about clean air, clean water, transitioning to clean energy, public health. So we want to get more legislators to support those priorities. And we don't have sort of the money or the influence that some folks do. So we try to educate, provide good factual information, and to connect legislators with their constituents, because good legislators want to hear from their constituents because they want to get reelected. So they want to hear what matters to their constituents. And I found that most good legislators will say, I want to hear more from my constituents because I'm always hearing from the other side. So lots of reasons to lobby, but for us, educating, building relationships, offering alternatives, and influencing policy are sort of the main reasons why we do it. So what is lobbying like during COVID? It's actually not that different now, and there are still plenty of options to lobby effectively. So for a while, initially during COVID, the only option was a virtual meeting or a phone call, both of which are still acceptable, but in-person meetings are starting to resume, mainly in district offices, because those offices are typically larger and less crowded. The Capitol is still a bit of a question mark. Some offices are closed, some are by appointment only. Staff are only there on certain days, but virtual meetings, in-district meetings are still great options. And overall, we found we can still be effective in getting our point across, doing it without the traditional face-to-face meeting. So how do we prepare to lobby? First, I suggest strongly do some homework, right? Like learn about the issue, not just how it impacts you, but how it impacts the district, right? Because legislators always, or most legislators will sort of follow their district and the priorities of the district. Now, you do not need to be an expert on issues to lobby, but having some familiarity is important. And you can contact advocacy organizations like us for help with that, and we can provide all sorts of data. We can connect you with people who also have this information. I also suggest developing answers to questions you might think they could ask, and have someone sort of play devil's advocate and ask you some, tough questions and come up with answers to these questions. So it's also helpful, as I mentioned, learn about the district, right? You live there, you probably know something about it, but it's always helpful to learn a little bit more, and also to learn about the elected officials themselves. A good resource is the Pennsylvania General Assembly's website. I don't know how familiar folks are with this. I will click on this link and hope it works. So you can just sort of see what the website is like. It's a lot of good information. You can see that that's changed. Yes, Tom? To the general websites, the General Assembly. All right, so if you just Googled like Pennsylvania Legislature, Pennsylvania General Assembly, this would come up. And it's sort of the main page, and there's a lot of great information here. Senate, you can see senators, if you click on this, listed alphabetically, their committees. I'll just click on this just to give you some familiarity of what this looks like and how it works. If my internet will let me, you can see committees, House members, just folks should know that this exists, and it's a good resource. So if I were to click on like Diane Herron, her page, they're all set up this way. You would have a map of the district, their committee assignments, co-sponsorship memoranda for folks who aren't familiar with that. This is a good way to see what folks are willing to support. This is legislation that they've actually introduced. Here we have self-government, a Reggie proceeds, liquor license, so a variety of things, but co-sponsor memos are a good way to see what legislation folks are supporting. And then there's usually a bio also, and you can find similar information if you were to Google their name, right? They would have an individual website that's a lot more thorough, and also their social media. You can take a look on there and see, what they're talking about, what matters to them, and sort of if it aligns with some of your priorities, right? Because it's always helpful to find some common ground. If that's a prior career, maybe you went to the same college or university, or maybe you have some of the same priorities, something like healthcare or education. And it's always nice to be able to start things off with a thank you too. Something else I'll show really quickly, I should have shown you before I left the site, are votes on prior bills. Now this is a little more advanced, but if there's a bill, say Senate Bill 119, which we'll be talking about a lot tonight, you can see by clicking on votes how someone voted. And so in the Senate, we know that there was a vote on the floor, final passage, and you can see how the vote shook down and where your senator was. So this is just Pennsylvania Legislature, Pennsylvania General Assembly, lots of really good, helpful information on there to sort of prep before a lobbying meeting to figure out where this person was, what their priorities are, what their background was, and just sort of get you ready for what the meeting should be like. Another really great resource is the Pennsylvania Environmental Scorecard. We produce this along with some of other environmental groups. This will very quickly show you if the environment is a priority for this elected official. It'll also tell you how your meeting will likely go if you're going to meet with your elected official about transitioning to renewable energy, and you see on the scorecard they have a 0%. That meeting might be a little tougher than if your elected official has a 100 or a 90%. And so if you would just go to the Pennsylvania Sierra Club's homepage, just Google PA Sierra Club, and then under the legislation tab, you would just click on the environmental scorecard. It would bring you to this page. You could click on this, and then you could very quickly see, here are the folks who make up the scorecard. And then here are the bills that are scored. And then they are listed across the top here. And then you can see how everybody, this is for the House, how they scored, right? We can see people have an 8%, 0, 62, some pretty terrible scores here, the House, and then the same for the Senate down below. Just wanted to flag this for folks that this is a really, really helpful tool housed on our website. And again, a good indication of what sort of priority the environment is for members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So what do we do next? The next step is determining, how are you going to lobby, right? Is it going to be an in-person meeting, which is probably the most effective because they know you're taking time out of your schedule to go to their office and discuss this issue, but we know that that's not an option for everyone, given work schedules, given current circumstances with COVID. Phone calls, emails, letters are helpful too, especially if there are a large number of them. And virtual again is always an option now. So first of all, you want to get on their schedule, right? Identify yourself as a constituent, let them know what you'd like to discuss, and then set up the meeting. It's relatively easy, a quick call to the district office or the Harrisburg office. You definitely want to get on their schedule and do it as soon as possible, because you may be looking at 3 weeks, 4 weeks out. Determine who will be attending. We know that sometimes with schedules, only one person can attend, but there's definitely strength in numbers, and showing that many people care about an issue is really important. But with that in mind, you do want to limit in-person meetings, I'd say, to a maximum of about 5 people. And that's usually due to small meeting spaces, and meetings with too many people, they just become unruly. I'd also use this as like a good rule of thumb for video meetings too. You want everyone to be able to participate without confusion. You also want to have something to leave behind. This is, of course, for in-person meetings, but you can also email a leave behind after a virtual meeting, or attach it to an email you send as a follow-up. Legislators and their staff have many, many meetings every day. So having something they can review after you've left can be really helpful. Most times they're not going to remember everything that you've said. They're really busy, but they can review this and contact you if they have questions afterwards. And so good rule of thumb, your leave behind should include the bill name, the bill number, and the prime sponsor, a brief summary of the issue, information about who will be impacted, how many people in the district, and why it's important. And then also your contact information, because if they have questions or they want more information, they should be able to get in touch with you. So, once you've done this sort of prep work, you want to determine your ask. And in this case, we have a very specific ask, right? Support RGGI and oppose the bills, Senate Bill 119, House Bill 637, that would stop Pennsylvania from joining RGGI, and oppose the concurrent resolutions that would do the same. Generally, when you're lobbying, there are also some other things to consider regarding an ask. There are other things you can ask for, and other things elected officials can do. You can ask them to co-sponsor a bill. For those of you not familiar with co-sponsorship, when someone is going to introduce a bill, they'll circulate a memo about the bill to their colleagues, asking them to co-sponsor it by signing on to show that they support it. You can also ask them to speak to their leadership about a bill to try to get it out of committee or to get a floor vote. These are things to keep in mind when you're doing this generally. But again, our ask right now is very specific: support RGGI and oppose the efforts to stop it. Something else you need to do is practice your pitch. Knowing what you're going to say before the meeting is really helpful, and know who is going to say what. If you're in a group, it really helps to assign roles. You definitely want to keep things high level initially. Like, you should be able to say everything you need to say in just a few minutes. When, details, nuances, personal stories, they can be addressed later in the conversation if there's time or interest from the legislator. But initially, you just want to be able to grab their attention by letting them know you're a constituent and letting them know what you want. It's also really important to be on time. This should go without saying, but I'll reinforce this. And if you're at some point in the future meeting with a legislator in their Capitol office in Harrisburg, you actually don't want to be early. These offices are very busy. They're usually very small and crowded. So you want to wait outside in the hallway. And if you arrive early, go into the office right on time. District offices are larger, slower paced, and it's okay to be a few minutes early to those meetings. And of course, you want to be on time for video meetings also. So we've done our prep work. We have our leave behind. We've practiced what we're going to say, and we're on time. So how will the meeting go? Truth be told, a lot of how the meeting will go depends on who your legislator is. And I'm not saying this to be, pessimistic, or to like put anyone off, but sometimes you can prepare and be polite and have data to support your position and still not get anywhere. And that's just part of lobbying, but it's still important to go there and let them know that they have constituents that disagree with them and you want them to support better policies. So, if your legislator is good, right, like they know the issues, they support what we want. So in this situation, it's easy to ask them to support what we support and oppose what we oppose. And this should be, an easy meeting. You'll have time to discuss other priority issues. It should be very friendly. These are the meetings that, we all really like and enjoy. If your legislator is what we call, gettable or sort of on the fence on some issues, this means they might, really support something that aligns with us, like solar energy, but not really support any other environmental issues. And these legislators, they're often willing to learn more about certain issues. They might support our issues depending on the priorities of their district. So there's a chance you might get them to support certain things, but there's a chance you might not. And then for those poor individuals who have bad legislators, like myself, expect them to oppose our priorities. They might be combative, aggressive, generally unfriendly. All the data and facts and figures you can show them isn't going to sway them. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Just some things to keep in mind that, lobbying tends to run the spectrum, and that often just depends on who you're meeting with. So for the actual meeting, these are some really basic, but really, I think, helpful hints. Don't forget to introduce yourself, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of people, and sometimes people will just jump into the meeting. But it's very important that you identify yourself as a constituent. Constituents have a lot more heft than, I do as a Sierra Club lobbyist. And it's much easier for, an elected official to sort of not listen to what I'm saying, because I don't vote for them, right? So as a constituent, you do have a right to be there, and they do want to hear from you. Say thanks if you can, right? You can thank them for a good vote, like I showed on the website, or for a co-sponsorship. It's always helpful, and it sets a nice tone for the meeting if you can start off with a thank you. If you can't thank your legislator for a good vote or anything good they've done, you can just say, thank you for taking the time to meet with me. And if you found some sort of common interest or common ground in your prep or research for the meeting, mention that too, because it's always helpful to sort of see each other as people. But just remember to keep that brief. You don't want to go too far down a different path. And then you want to let them know why you're there, right? You can start off like, I'd like to discuss House Bill 637, right? This bill would halt Pennsylvania's efforts to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and would require legislative approval for the DEP to regulate carbon. It's short, it's concise, it's accurate. Keep in mind also, if you are in the Capitol or there's meetings happening in the Capitol, you might only have 5 or 10 minutes because schedules are so packed. So you do want to be able to say what you need to say fairly quickly. In the district offices, meetings tend to be longer, usually like 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how busy the legislator is, and also depending on how talkative the legislator is. Like sometimes you'll talk to them and they'll just sit there and nod your head. But it's still important to be concise and to stay on topic. So you want to concisely discuss the issue. I suggest maybe 3 or 4 main points. And so if I wanted to discuss the RGGI bills, I would say something similar to what I have on this slide, right? So Pennsylvania needs to participate in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The clock is ticking when it comes to climate change. And I'm very concerned about climate change because, and this is how you're relating it to you, right? I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent. I care about the future. Climate change has impacted my community or my business, my livelihood, my hobbies, right? You want to make it about how this is impacting you. The legislature is trying to delay climate action by preventing Pennsylvania from joining RGGI. These bills would require legislative approval for DEP to regulate carbon in any way. There's also these concurrent resolutions. So again, what are you specifically there for? You're addressing these bills and highlighting these bills because oftentimes they don't know exactly what you're talking about. So being specific with bill numbers can be very helpful. And then in this last section, how are you relating this back to your community and the district? I've seen the Palmer Creek flood numerous times. It's caused significant flooding downtown. We're having 100-year rain events every few months, and these floods have harmed local businesses and have cost millions of dollars. We can't wait any longer to act on climate. The longer we wait to act, the more disruptive the changes will have to be to cut carbon pollution. So, in just a few sentences, you can quickly and easily cover the main points of the issue, right? We have limited time to address carbon. These bills stop the current efforts to regulate carbon pollution. And I mentioned why I personally care about this issue as a constituent and how it's impacting my community and the district. And I mean, this is all you really need to do. And if you have data on costs, health impacts, economic impacts, then include that. But please keep in mind, and if there's one point we want to make tonight, it's that you don't need to be an expert on RGGI or any other issue to lobby for it. Why it matters to you, how it impacts your community, and how it impacts the district. Whether that's good or bad, good bills or bad bills, it's really all you need to talk about. And so going back to this slide, I think there are a few more points on here. You want to ask questions, right? This should be a conversation, hopefully, and not you just sort of talking at someone rapid fire. When you say, I want to talk about Senate Bill 119, ask if they're following this bill, right? Ask their position. Do you support this bill? Do you oppose this bill? If they don't have a position, ask them to oppose it. Or, with these bills, if they support them, ask, why do you support them? The information they provide, even if we're not going to sway them, it can still be useful, right? Perhaps other legislators who are still on the fence could believe this also, and we can change their minds if we have the right information. And also keep in mind, some offices are more talkative than others and will have a conversation with you. Others won't. Some offices will not reveal their position on bills, and that's frustrating, but that's also just the way it is with certain folks. And if they ask you a question and you don't have an answer to it, that's totally acceptable. But be honest and say, I can't answer that, but I can get you an answer. And then you have an opportunity to follow up afterwards with an email or a phone call. Or if it's convenient, you can even, stop by and drop it off to sort of continue that connection and that relationship building. And then number 6, this is pretty obvious, but thank them for their time and thank any of the staffers also. They're usually very, very busy, and saying thank you is important. And then again, follow up, right? If there are questions you couldn't answer, follow up if they didn't have a stance during the meeting. If they said they weren't sure how they'd vote, wait, a few days or a week, give them a call, send them an email and ask them if they have a stance now. And also, if you have a good elected official, right, we don't need to worry about how they're going to vote on this, but building and maintaining a relationship is still really important. And you can follow up by asking, what else you can do to be supportive. Would a letter to the editor be helpful? If we organized an event with the Sierra Club, would you be willing to speak there? And just again, keep in mind that this is ultimately about relationship building. And so I think those are my sort of tips. I'm going to pass it over to Tom Schuster for the next few slides to discuss RGGI.
Sorry, I guess I was still muted. If you want to stop sharing, I can share my screen. That way, I think it makes it easier for you to watch the chat and admit people if they come in.
Did that work? Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to go in present mode. So can everybody see that big? Okay. All right. So I'm going to give just a kind of quick overview on the substance of the RGGI rule. And as Jen said, you don't have to be an expert in this. I mean, there's a lot of information on this available. There's a lot of technical details as far as how the rule works. But for the purposes of lobbying, none of that is really all that important. This is really more about how much of a priority people place on dealing with climate change and what they think it will do for the district, for better or worse. So I'm going to keep this at a pretty high level. I do think that there are some common misperceptions about RGGI and some intentional misinformation that's out there. And so we'll go over a few things to combat that if they come up. But in its most basic sense, RGGI is a form of cap and trade program. It's a regional program that states can opt into. And what it does is it sets a limit on the total amount of carbon dioxide pollution that can be emitted by power plants within a state as a whole. That limit declines over time, and it currently declines at a rate of about 3% per year. The rate of decline is reevaluated by the RGGI participating states every 3, 4, 5 years. And we're expecting that the rate of decline will accelerate over time with the next program review. But that's the cap portion of it. Now, the limited numbers of tons that can be emitted each come with a credit associated with them. So if I am a power plant and I am subject to this rule, I have to buy a credit at auction for each ton of carbon dioxide pollution that I emit. I have to pay for that credit. And the money that I pay for that credit goes into a fund that the states can then use to invest in priority programs. And so generally that is energy efficiency programs or renewable energy programs. Sometimes some states have programs to defray costs to low-income ratepayers or small businesses or something like that. Some states even use it to invest in climate resilience programs. So that's the basics of how RGGI works. A little bit more detail for Pennsylvania specifically. When this rule goes into effect, it will set the first year that we'll be participating is 2022. When it goes into effect, the cap statewide will be 78 million tons in Pennsylvania. That will decline to 58 million tons in 2030 under the current program. Again, if the regional program review accelerates that decline, we'll deal with that when that happens. So when power plants have to buy these allowances, they have been paying on average $5 to $6 a ton at these quarterly auctions. The prices are actually going up, which means that the cap is actually more. It's tighter. It's a tighter cap, and so there's more competition for the allowances, and the prices are up to $9 a ton. That means that for that, the higher the prices are, the more money Pennsylvania would stand to get for those 78 million tons worth of credits that it auctions off. If prices stay there, we may be more on the $700 million a year in proceeds that can be reinvested. If they drop back down, it may be on the low end of that, 300 to 400 million a year. But anyway, it's a significant amount of money. That money would go into something called the Clean Air Fund, and that is a fund that's established under the Air Pollution Control Act. Money that goes into that fund can be used for anything that improves air quality in Pennsylvania. That criterion is I think pretty broad and subject to interpretation, and one of the things that will happen after we are done kind of fighting this legislative battle over the future of RGGI, assuming we win, is that DEP will begin a process by which they will create a plan for how that money out in the Clean Air Fund gets spent. And we will, once that process starts, we'll be coming out with some more guidance on what kinds of things that we're advocating for. But long story short, we want to see a lot of increased investment in weatherization and efficiency programs, particularly targeted at low-income ratepayers, so that they don't have to, just in case rates do go up slightly because of the price of carbon pollution, that they're not actually paying more for their energy bill as a whole. But there's a lot of other programs that these can go to. Clean energy programs to plug abandoned gas wells. If you can think of a program that might be good for your community, that has a positive impact on air pollution, that could be a compelling thing that your legislator might be interested in if they're on the fence for RGGI. So I'm going to go over just a few of the kind of counter arguments that we're hearing about RGGI right now, both from legislators and from opponents who are lobbying. I think the one we hear most often is it's going to increase electricity prices. And logically, that seems intuitive, right? Because you're actually putting a price on pollution associated with power generation. You would think that the price of power would go up, but in practice, we have not actually seen that. The states that have participated in RGGI over the past 10 years have actually seen a decrease in electricity prices. And even though electricity prices for the country as a whole have gone up during that time. And the main driver of that is that when these funds get reinvested in energy efficiency, that reduces the demand for electricity. And when demand goes down, prices go down. And that effect has more than offset any upward pressure on prices that come from the cost of carbon credits. So that's one major argument we hear that we can easily push back on. Another one is that RGGI will cost jobs in Pennsylvania. The fact is that there's been a lot of economic modeling done as far as what the impacts will be. And again, it's the investments that are driving an actual net increase in jobs and a net increase in economic activity over the course of the next decade as we participate in RGGI. And there's a lot of, I think, concern, particularly in the western part of the state, about the decline of coal. And the reality is that this decline is happening anyway. Coal is obsolete. It's not competitive anymore with renewable energy even, let alone gas. And so we are already seeing a wave of retirement of coal plants that's going to continue. And in fact, modeling of the power sector shows that these plants are really not going to last more than 5 or 6 years, regardless of whether we join RGGI. Some people are saying that there's no evidence that RGGI really works. They're saying that there are, basically that all it does is force dirty generators out of the RGGI participating states. But in fact, again, analysis have shown this has not been the case. In the participating states since RGGI began, we've seen nearly a 50% reduction in carbon pollution. That's a much faster decline than in other places. And while we do expect some effect of shifting generation outside of Pennsylvania's boundaries, that effect has really been overblown. And overall, it's been demonstrated that the pollution declines that have resulted from RGGI, the pollution declines that have happened during the time that RGGI has happened have mostly been attributable to RGGI itself and not other factors. So that's it. It's kind of a disingenuous argument. A lot of the folks who make that argument are people who don't actually want to do anything about climate change. But you will potentially run into that. And then there's a process argument about legislative approval supposedly being needed to join this. This is not true. The Air Pollution Control Act allows the Department of Environmental Protection to regulate a wide range of air pollutants, including carbon dioxide. Some variations on this argument are that this is an interstate compact that requires legislative approval. It's not an interstate compact. That's just legally false. This is a program that we are adopting that is our own regulation, but it is designed to be compatible with regulations that other states are adopting, and we are voluntarily participating. We're not legally bound by any kind of compact to participate. When we circulate the slides here, there's a link to these myths and others, and more detail in terms of how these arguments can be debunked. And again, you don't necessarily have to memorize any of this before you go and talk to your legislator, but it helps to kind of read through and be able to anticipate what they might say, anticipate your response, and then you can follow up with them after the fact with more information if that's helpful for them. We've also got a series of fact sheets that you'll have access to in this presentation that focus on specific issues. People care about RGGI for a lot of reasons. Some of them are interested in just the climate benefits of it, but others are interested in what it will do to reduce pollution in communities near power plants. Some are interested in the overall public health aspects. Some are interested in the fact that it will help grow the clean energy economy and create jobs. There's a number of different constituencies that will benefit from this for different reasons. And so hopefully you'll find those useful. And with that, I think my portion is over. I will stop sharing my screen. I'll turn it back over to Jen. And we will have actually see a couple of questions. Jen, do you want to wait on that until the end, or you want me to just kind of address those now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can briefly answer Marion's question, and if you want to. So the bills we're referencing, Senate Bill 119 and House Bill 637, what they would do is require legislative approval to participate in RGGI. or to regulate carbon in any way. So the DEP would not be able to do anything related to carbon in any way without legislative approval. And that's, it's very concerning because if you're familiar with our legislature, you know how unwilling they are to really do anything about anything, especially when it comes to clean energy, or the gas industry. And then as far as the RGGI rulemaking, it passed its two final regulatory hurdles, and I think it just needs to be approved by the Attorney General. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, and that's pro forma. It's approving as to form. It's not approving as to any kind of um, political decision. And it's already gone through one review as far as whether or not they have authority. So it's a fairly technical review. The only thing that could really stop it at this point is if either the legislature passes a law that revokes the authority, or we are anticipating some legal challenges to be filed. And so, the courts could possibly step in and say, no, but we do feel like we're on solid legal ground there, but you never know what a judge is going to say. To Richard's question, says that it's my understanding RGGI only applies to coal-fired power plants and they're winding down. How will the program hop up over time? So RGGI actually applies to more than just coal-fired power plants. It applies to any power plant that's over 25 megawatts in size, which is pretty small, and burns fossil fuels to generate electricity. So that includes power plants that burn gas or fuel oil. And so the coal plants will be most impacted because they create the largest amount of carbon pollution per unit of electricity. But it will also, so it will likely accelerate by a few years overall. How do we know how many above 25 megawatt plants we have? We've got a list of them. There's I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's roughly 60 power plants in the state. There's quite a lot. It's the vast majority of our generation, like well over 95% of the fossil fuel power plants in the state are going to be subject to this. There are a few kind of scattered around that are smaller, but those are generally not economical to run, and they don't run very often. But the main benefit of this program is, with respect to gas-fired power plants, is by placing a cap on the overall amount of carbon emissions, it really makes it a lot less likely that you will see any continued build out of new gas plants after this is adopted. And as it ramps down, it's going to put continued pressure on those plants to actually operate less over time. So the initial effects, you'll probably see accelerated coal plant retirement and basically kind of flat gas generation. And then as the program moves forward, you'll see a ramp down in gas use also. And I'm seeing a bunch of questions come in. Maybe we want to finish the presentation quick, and then I'll scroll back to those after we do that.
Yep, sounds good. So we just have a few more slides to go over quickly, and then we can open the floor to discussion and questions. So just a few more tips when meeting with your elected officials. Something that I found to be really super helpful is take notes, right? Very often a lot is said during one of these meetings, so it's a really good practice to write things down so you can review things later for clarity's sake. And then again, be on time. And also mention other organizations, because there's sort of strength in numbers. Show them that other people, community leaders, other organizations support these issues. Show that there's more support for the position than just yours. And I just have a few rules of thumb here that we keep in mind regarding sort of how much effort we put into things. So if your elected official is good, right? How do we make them a champ? Right? We do that by showing them support and how we can, influence that and sort of prop them up and get them to be a champion and a voice for our priorities. If they're a maybe, we need to show a lot of support for our position and how this will impact their district. And if they're no, they're just not someone we're going to get. We really just at some point, it's important to meet with them. It's important that they know their constituents, disagree with them. But at some point, you just have to, stop putting time into these folks, and you're better spent putting your energies into, the gettable folks and the good guys that we can make champions. And so some additional information here. I won't click on this. We're going to send the slides to everyone afterwards, but if you click here, it'll again take you to the legislature's website. You can see all the session days where legislators are actually in Harrisburg sort of doing the business of government. If you want to make a meeting in district, you obviously want to do it when they're not in session, or if you feel like you can brave the Capitol, you'll know when they're in session. It's also just good to keep track of when they're there, because that's when votes will be happening. And then again, these links will take you to the legislature's webpage, and you can see the committee schedules. This is the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee for the House and the Senate. This is where the vast majority of our bills go there. And this is, the first step in the legislative process, and just good information to see committee members and, what's in the committee and when the next meetings are. And then additionally, if folks are interested in meetings, we are more than happy to provide support, whether it's some of the fact sheets that we provided earlier, but on a variety of issues, helping set up meetings, prep for meetings, attend meetings. We're always looking for constituents who are willing to engage with their elected officials, because it is just so important for our work and to move things forward that they hear from their constituents. And again, things like letters to the editor, op-eds, virtual events, we're more than happy to assist with that also if folks are interested in that sort of work. And then just a few more resources for when you receive the slides. Something I would really suggest is taking a look at our bill tracker. This takes you to our website, and you can see all the bills that we are currently tracking. I think there's a little over 200 right now. And then also the Environmental Daily blog. If folks are not signed up for that, click the link and sign up. You get a good daily dose of environmental news in Pennsylvania on a daily basis. Very helpful resource from former DEP Secretary Dave Hess. And then I think that's it. We can open it up to questions. I'll stop sharing. All right.
Yeah, and we can definitely go through the questions that are coming in on the chat. One thing I'd like to add to what Jen said about folks who are not with us. And yeah, I agree. It's not worth it necessarily to beat your head against the wall by trying to meet with them constantly until they say yes. They may never get to yes. However, I'll also say that it's often useful to try to figure out someone that they might listen to more than you. Messenger matters, right? And so do a little research on what motivates them, where they come from, if they had a family business or maybe there's a manufacturer in their district who, this is an example that we were working on, trying to convince a chair of a committee to bring up a bill related to electric vehicles for a vote, and he happened to have two companies that make components for batteries for electric vehicles in his district. And ultimately, it didn't. In that instance, it didn't persuade him, but sometimes you can find the secret sauce that will move someone, and there are people who, say, for example, support solar because there's a business in their district that supports solar, even if they're not good on our other issues. So be creative. Think about what might influence them if you can't. So scrolling back up the chat a little bit, I see a question from Marion. Are there any energy companies that have supported RGGI? There are, and in fact, some of them are in the generation business. Exelon which is Pepco or Pico's parent company. And they also own a number of generators, including nuclear generators in Pennsylvania. They support it. Talon Energy is another owner of some power plants that supports it. They've been ramping down their coal fleet over time. Anyway, there's a couple of I think BP actually, the oil company supports it. So there are a number of energy companies that see that there will be some type of carbon regulation happening, and prefer a market-based approach. I mean, honestly, Sierra Club would prefer more of a regulatory approach, but this was one of the few options that was really available to us given the political situation that we're in. And so, we're supporting this as, kind of like the best available option that we have. So question from Ben, the stat about carbon pollution in RGGI states dropping 47%. Yeah, that applies to the power sector, not to economy-wide emissions. And everything to do with RGGI applies to the power sector. I will note though that once you've got a cap on carbon dioxide emissions from the power sector, it does help to then pursue electrification of other end uses like cars and buildings and things like that, because that any additional demand for electricity, once you have that cap in place that's always declining, any additional demand for electricity is going to have to be met by carbon-free sources. Then source to refer on information on local impacts on climate change. Yeah, so there's a report that just came out recently from the DEP called the Climate Impacts Assessment. We can try to put a link to that in the follow-up email that talks about what the impacts will be in Pennsylvania specifically. It's kind of written in a rather dry format, but I think that some of the biggest impacts that we're going to see have to do with severe weather, flooding, landslides, infrastructure that will be much more vulnerable because of that, and also heat-related impacts on health and agriculture and things like that.
I think the next question, what are some good choices for people to bring along to the meetings? Borough councils, CEOs, clergy? Yes, all of those are yes. Community leaders, again, folks who have been impacted, folks who have sort of sway or clout. And also, again, this goes back to like doing some of your research as to who they listen to. I do a lot of lobbying of folks in central Pennsylvania, and a lot of them are like former Boy Scouts or have a Boy Scout camp. And so like things that the Boy Scouts care about, they're always willing to listen to that. Or there are certain things like a member of the clergy can be really influential for some people. So it helps to sort of spend a little time, like I said, looking at their website, seeing the things that matter to them, their interests, and trying to make those connections. You can also reach out to us for information on this too, because we tend to have, with some folks, some more insider information as to who they listen to. But yeah, the folks you mentioned, like municipal officials, CEOs, we sort of refer to those as grass tops, and it's always helpful to get them to weigh in. And then the next question from Sharon, I understand the strategy for talking to an official when they are undecided or a yes. Is there a different strategy going into a meeting when you know the official is a yes? Did you mean no by that?
I sure did.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so when someone is a no, yeah, it's more about maybe like asking questions, having a conversation, like figuring out why are you opposed to this? Because one, you can try to provide information that counters that, which likely won't be helpful. But it's information that when I do it as like a paid staffer and a lobbyist, it's helpful to take those talking points and see if we can influence people who are on the fence, right? Because a lot of times within the Republican caucus, talking points are sort of spreading like wildfire, and some people buy into them immediately and become steadfastly opposed, and others are sort of a little more reluctant. So if we're hearing the same things, we may be able to address them with someone who's on the fence. But oftentimes, if someone, is a no, and they're a no, and they just dig their heels in, it's really just about talking to them and saying, I'm your constituent, we disagree. And, you need to know that you're representing everyone in your district, and I disagree, and here's why. And doing it like politely and calmly.
Actually, I did mean the reverse, that I understand the undecided and the no, because you're being persuasive. But when it's a yes, isn't it seemed like is a waste of time, and everybody's patting each other on the back because they agree with each other? Like, is
No,
there
so
something you can do more?
yeah, so if someone is a yes, you can ask them, um, you know, sort of questions. And if you have a good relationship with them, it's more helpful. Like, you can ask, what's the conversation like in your caucus, right? Or is the administration reaching out, or what's the attitude towards the administration in this case, because the administration was pushing Reggie. You can ask them to talk to their leadership, right? What is your leadership saying? Is your leadership willing to, try to get this bill out of committee, or to get a vote on the floor? So when someone's a yes, you don't have to really do, convincing or arm twisting there, but you can ask them for other things. And I mentioned this earlier, like, you can ask them to co-sponsor a certain bill. You can discuss, a piece of related legislation or something else. It doesn't have to be solely about this. I think you can, ask a lot of questions about this, specific questions, or you can sort of, talk about other things too, since you already know that they're a yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that point about how are the discussions going in your caucus is super important. What we found with Reggie in particular is that a lot of Democrats are being pressured by trade unions to oppose Reggie. And so there are some folks who, are kind of in a tough position. Even though they support climate action, they rely on unions like IBEW and Boilermakers, or pipe fitters, or to help them get elected. And so they're in a bit of a bind. And so it's good to know, and having conversations with folks who are champs, they'll often be more open about those kind of pressures that they're facing, and it can help us with our strategy. Let's see, there was a question, how many coal plants do we have? What is the number slated to close? So yeah, when I started with Sierra Club in 2012, there were 20 large conventional coal plants left in Pennsylvania. Now there are only 3 that are not already scheduled to retire. Right now, so we have 6 plants that operate, that are currently operating, that are burning coal. 3 of them are scheduled to retire, and then 3 are a bit more open-ended. We also have a larger number, about a dozen, or relatively small waste coal plants. They are over 25 megawatts, but they're generally under 100, which is still pretty small for a coal plant. And they actually they're subject to Reggie. Their emissions are subject to Reggie, but they kind of they enjoy something called a set aside, where they receive credits without having to pay for them. And so that's been an issue that we've been kind of pushing back on. But at the end of the day, it doesn't increase the amount of carbon dioxide coming from the power sector. It just makes it so that those plants have an advantage relative to the large conventional coal plants and the gas plants. Should we identify ourselves as Sierra Club when we go in? Does it depend? Jen, I'll let you take that one.
I mean, yeah, I think it depends on who you're meeting with. Like if you had a business owner with you who was impacted, I would definitely let them take the lead, and maybe you can just identify yourself as a constituent. But really, it's totally up to you. Like if you want to say, I'm a Sierra Club volunteer, I'm a Sierra Club member, you can. But in some instances, it's definitely not helpful, and sometimes it's better for other voices to take the lead. And I hope you're not meeting with Mastriano.
Mastriano's my senator. You know, what am I going to do?
Really? I thought you're just putting that name out there because it's like so prevalent, but oh, wow.
I'm sorry. I hope you're up to date on your shots.
Sure
am. All right, let's see. What else are we missing? I think we've gone through the questions here. If anybody has, if I've skipped over one, I apologize, and feel free to ask it out loud right now. Or if anybody has any additional questions and you just want to come off mute and ask, feel free.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Ben Kennedy here. I know I can check on the tracker and everything, but do we have a sense of what is the time frame here? Will this be useless if I wait 2 weeks, or what's going on with that?
Oh, that's such a complicated question, Tom. I just want to punt it to you.
Yeah, I would recommend going in as soon as possible, because we're expecting multiple votes on this. There will be votes next week on the disapproval resolutions. There will be votes sometime later this fall, likely, on the other anti-RGGI bills. And then there will be, once we expect the disapproval resolutions are going to pass, and then Governor Wolf will veto them in short order. And then I think the real test is going to be, can they override the veto? And that's really what we're trying to do, is shore up the folks who and make sure that we've got enough votes that they cannot override the veto, right? And the timing on that vote is unclear. I don't think they're going to be rushing to do it, but as far as the resolutions go, there is a clock. They can't delay this thing forever. But that clock is based on a number of legislative days, and it could potentially drag on until the end of the year. So that's the long answer, but the short answer is, I think the sooner you can get in there, the better. If you can get them to vote no on this thing the first time, that's going to make the override vote go better.
Yes, but this will be a long, drawn out fight that they will extend as long as they can.
Yeah, and it's possible that those other anti-RGGI bills, they may drag those out into next year too. So yeah, the bottom line is, if your legislators are on the fence about this, early and often.
Yes, and that goes for Democrats too. There are a lot of sort of mediocre Democrats out there who are still on the fence.
Yeah, and as I said, Democrats who are, aligned with labor. So they might be good on a lot of our things, but not necessarily on this. Bill, it looks like maybe you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Tom and Jen. Great information. given that this could stretch into next year, is it still possible for the rulemaking to move ahead? And wasn't there a plan to be able to initiate this next, or, you know, how soon into 2022 did they predict they would be able to implement? And how long does it take for the implementation before plants actually, like, you know, setting up the carbon quotas and all that? How long does that take to get going?
Yeah, good question. So I mentioned that the disapproval resolutions, that's HCRRR1 and SCRRR1, those things, those two have clocks attached to them. While those clocks are ticking, the rulemaking cannot be published, and so it cannot be finalized. But they have to vote on those next week, and then they'll have a finite amount of time to try to override a veto. And if they fail to do that, then the rulemaking can be published and it can be implemented. And so we're hoping that that will happen by the end of the year. When I say that the legislative fight will you know, probably go into next year, that means that they will continue to try to revoke the authority to do this, or to, you know, potentially amend the bills and repeal the regulation. That's something that the legislature has the ability to try to do, but that can't, you know, they can't necessarily stop implementation while they do that, right? So that's kind of a important difference between the disapproval resolutions and then the other bills. As far as when the limits would actually apply, likely, since the auctions are quarterly, and so it is likely that the earliest this could actually go into effect and apply to power plants would be the second quarter of 2022. So April 1st of 2022. That's if everything really goes well at this point. It's possible that that the legislature could try to drag it out a little bit, and they may succeed in delaying it until June 1st of 2022. But I think that's probably the latest. That's probably the latest it would start.
I had a side question. Are there proposals for new natural gas generation plants, and how long does it take usually to get a natural gas plant built and online?
There are a lot of them proposed. Luckily, a few, I shouldn't say luckily, but a few of them have recently been terminated, which is good. A couple others have been built and have gone online, but there's still, I would say, about 6 or 8 large ones that are in some stage of the permitting process in Pennsylvania, and then a whole slew of smaller ones. And I'd say, you know, from initial proposal to actually like breaking ground, it usually takes about 3 years to go through the permitting process if everything goes well. They have to get interconnection agreements with the grid operator. They have to get environmental permitting. They have to line up investors. So there's a lot of things they have to do. And I think that if we're successful in getting RGGI implemented and fighting off the inevitable legal challenges, I think that we stand a good chance of defeating the vast majority of those remaining proposed gas plants.
Thanks. I know this is a RGGI call, but do you have any idea on or feel for community solar? What do you think is going to happen with that next year?
That's so there's a tremendous amount of animosity right now in the Republican caucus due to the governor's handling of COVID, due to RGGI. That seems to be bleeding over into everything. The prime sponsor is still optimistic that the bill is going to get a vote in the House and be in the Senate next year. I would be surprised if that happens at this point, but I think maybe when some of the animosity due to RGGI dies down, it may have a path forward. But right now, we're not nearly as optimistic as we were earlier in the year, unfortunately.
Yeah. One of the things that we're seeing, and I think this is also a result of just kind of the cult of Trump as well, is that a number of Republicans that previously were kind of more of in the all of the above camp in terms of energy, and didn't necessarily have a problem with renewable energy, even though that they weren't willing to act on climate, are now seeing things like wind and solar as a threat, unfortunately. So yeah, we'll see how long that lasts, but it may require some changes in who our legislators are, unfortunately, in order to actually see that bill go through.
Anyone else have questions? We know we're about 20 minutes over, so if folks want to jump off, we won't be offended in any way. If folks want to stay on for a few more minutes, please, feel free. We're happy to chat for a little while yet, but we understand that folks may have other things to do too. Anyone else have any final questions? All right, well, as a follow-up, we'll send, I think, the recording and the slides, and folks, our email addresses are on there. So feel free to reach out at any time if we can be helpful on this or other issues.
Thank you so much. Great session.
Yep, thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.